and welcome back to the Body for Minds podcast. I actually had another topic planned for today, but since we just had a heat wave, I thought this felt much more timely. And yes, you may hear it in my voice, I also caught a cold thanks to the abundant use of ACs on full power when the minute you step outside, you break a sweat in seconds. And yes, judging by the summers we've been having lately, I'm fairly sure this won't be the last heat wave we'll experience. So this might be very useful for you, or I hope it will be very useful for you. And this episode came about because I had one of those mornings that just stays with you. To start with, one of my children had already completely shut down before we had even really started the day. He was simply too hot already. Nothing dramatic had happened, but he couldn't really think, couldn't regulate, and every little thing felt too much. We got it sorted, but you know how it is, and it takes up a lot of your energy already. Then I took my daughter to camp. We had to wait a little bit in line to check her in, and while we were standing there, someone arrived with a child and walked straight in front of us. Maybe she hadn't noticed we were all queuing. I don't know. But I politely mentioned that there was a line. She didn't seem to hear me, so I repeated it, still politely, just a little bit louder. What happened next completely surprised me. She immediately told me how aggressive I was and how laid back she was as a Californian. I apologized several times, offered for her to go ahead, which she initially refused. But she continued telling me how aggressive I had been and how laid back she was by comparison. And eventually, as we moved ahead and had to park my daughter's scooter, she ended up being ahead of us and we both just stopped talking. But as you can probably tell from me sharing this story, the interaction stayed with me. And on my way to work, I replayed the conversation, and I'm sure you've done this before too. Could I have said something differently? Should I have said nothing at all? Could I have prevented the whole situation? And then something clicked for me. Actually, I don't think anything I could have said would have necessarily changed that interaction. Not because she was a bad person, not because I was right, and certainly not because I know what was going on for her. Maybe she had already had a stressful morning. Maybe she had previous experiences that shaped how she interpreted what I said. Maybe she simply didn't appreciate being called out. Or maybe the heat had already left both of us with less patience than we normally would have had. I'll never know. And in the end, it doesn't really matter. And probably, I spent way too much energy reflecting on that conversation. And I'm sure that's something that's familiar to you too. But what the interaction reminded me of was something much broader. When our nervous systems are already under strain, it simply takes less to tip us outside our usual window of tolerance. And that goes for children, adults, all of us really. And so heat doesn't make us dysregulated, but it can make regulation harder. And that distinction matters because it helps us understand what's happening without excusing unkind behavior. It also made me realize that this is something we don't really talk about enough. We tend to think about heat in terms of avoiding sunburn or preventing heat stroke, but we rarely talk about what heat does to our nervous system long before it becomes medically dangerous. And it turns out there is actually a very good physiological explanation for why many of us feel less patient, less focused, and more emotionally reactive during hot weather. Our bodies work incredibly hard to keep our internal temperature stable. Your nervous system is constantly monitoring what's happening inside your body, and when it gets hot, it shifts into cooling mode. Your blood vessels widen to release heat. You begin to sweat. Your heart works a little harder to move blood towards your skin. And as you sweat, you lose water and electrolytes. None of this is a problem. In fact, it's exactly what a healthy body is designed to do. But it does come at a cost. All of those processes require energy. So your body is already working before you've answered a single email, packed a lunchbox, or had your first difficult conversation of the day. That doesn't mean you'll suddenly lose your temper because it's hot outside, but it does mean you may have a little less capacity available for everything else. Your window of tolerance can become a little narrower, so to speak. Things you would normally shrug off suddenly feel irritating. Noise may feel louder. The children arguing may feel overwhelming more quickly. And you may notice you're less patient, more forgetful, finding it harder to concentrate. Maybe you reread the same email 3 times or walk to a room and forget why you went there. You get the gist. Even mild dehydration has been shown to affect attention, working memory, reaction time, and mood. That doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means your brain is trying to do its job while your body is simultaneously working hard to keep you cool. And for those of us already carrying a high mental load, and if you're listening to this podcast, that probably includes you, that smaller margin can become noticeable surprisingly quickly. Now let's bring this back to body awareness, because this is exactly why body awareness matters. When we notice ourselves becoming impatient or overwhelmed, our first instinct is often to ask, what's wrong with me today? Or why can't I keep it together? And then the shame spiral begins. But sometimes that's not the most helpful question, or most of the times actually, because a shame spiral never helps you solve a problem or be kinder. Sometimes the better questions are much simpler. For example, how is my body doing right now? Am I actually just too hot? Have I had enough to drink today? Have I eaten? Have I maybe sat in the sun longer than I realized? Do I simply need to cool down? Sometimes what looks like an emotional problem is actually a physical one first. That doesn't mean every emotional reaction can be explained by hunger, heat, or tiredness. Relationships are much more complicated than that. But checking your body's basic needs first gives you a much more compassionate starting point. We instinctively do this for our children. If they melt down late in the afternoon, we wonder whether they're hungry, thirsty, tired, or simply too hot. We don't immediately conclude that they are difficult children. Or sometimes we forget and actually do, but that's a conversation for another day. Yet, when it's us, we often skip those questions altogether. Instead, we go straight to what's wrong with me? I'm failing again. I should be coping better. Body awareness invites us to reverse that order. Start with the body. Then, if there's still something that needs untangling emotionally, you'll have much more capacity to do that too. Your body isn't getting in your way, it's giving you information, and that's true for our children in the heat as well. When children suddenly become more emotional, more explosive, or completely shut down during very hot weather, they're not being difficult. In fact, that doesn't only apply for very hot weather. Behavior always is a way of communicating. It's just their best way of communicating things. But again, that's for another day maybe. Their nervous systems are working hard too. Their bodies are trying to regulate themselves while having fewer resources available for everything else. And once we understand that, we naturally respond with a little more compassion for them and for ourselves. So if there's one thing I hope you take away from today's episode, it's this. On very hot days, lower the bar a little. Drink before you're thirsty. Seek shade before you're desperate for it. Take breaks. Move a little more slowly if you can. Offer yourself and your children a little more grace. And before assuming you're failing at staying calm, simply pause and ask, how is my body doing right now? Because sometimes staying cool really does help us keep our cool. Thank you so much for listening today. If this episode made you think of another parent who's currently navigating the summer heat with young children, I'd love it if you shared it with them. Until next time, take good care of yourself. More you, less noise.